Welcome to the Candle Business Coach Podcast, a show about the craft of candle making and small business. I'm your host, Kirsty Allen, and I'm a candle maker, mum of three, and kindness advocator. Join me as I dive into all things candles and small business and deliver advice and tips to you in episodes every Tuesday and Friday. Are you on the list to get my daily motivation emails? Every day I'll send you a message that is designed to help keep you focused on taking action toward your goals. Sign up using the link in the show notes. This episode is brought to you by my free ebook, The Candle Business Marketing Kickstarter Kit. Inside this free ebook, you'll learn to identify your blocks of time to dedicate to your candle business. Plus, there are several tips and tricks for re-engaging past customers and attracting new customers into your business so you can grow your business and reach your goals. Check out the link in the show notes for your copy. Welcome back to the podcast, my friend. It's so good to have you here, and I don't think I say it enough, but I certainly appreciate you taking the time to listen to my voice and my words and my knowledge that I share with you each time I sit down to record. I'm often thinking and wondering what you're doing and where you are when you're listening to the episodes. So I'd love for you to send me an Instagram message at Candle Business Coach, just letting me what you do or what you usually do when you're listening to my podcast episodes. Are you driving in the car? Are you doing some exercise? Are you just, going around the house doing some chores with me in your ears? I'd love to know. So yeah, send me a message on Instagram so we can connect. That would be amazing. So in today's episode, I wanted to cover some tips and tricks for candle makers and for making candles. I know that I have a mixture of new and experienced candle makers that listen to my podcast. So it can be tricky trying to find the balance of content in each episode to cater for all the different stages in the candle making journey. But in today's episode, I want to zoom in on the newer candle makers and share some tips and tricks that will help you progress along your journey. I'll also be sharing the exact steps I take to make a batch of candles if you've ever been curious to know how I make my candles. So let's get started with the content for today. So first and foremost, I want to let you know that it's okay to get it wrong. Many beginner candle makers get frustrated and discouraged when their first batch of candles doesn't turn out as expected, particularly because there's such a widespread myth that all you need to do is melt some wax, chuck in a wick and some fragrance oil, and there you go, you've got the perfect candle. But I want you to know that you are made for this, and what you're doing is not a waste of melted wax and materials if it doesn't work out right. So don't worry, it's okay to mess up the first few tries, because that's how you truly know that you're learning and understanding the nature of the materials you are using. And you just need to trust the process, and you will enjoy discovering your new craft. So the next thing I wanted to talk to you about is knowing your wax. There are so many different kinds of wax you can use to make your candles, like soy wax or coconut wax, beeswax, paraffin, and blends and combinations of each of these, which means that there are literally hundreds of possible combinations that you can use. So it's just really important to learn the correct or most successful way of using the wax type that you've chosen. And that doesn't matter what type of wax you use or what blend you use as well. And what that means is that you need to be doing thorough testing and experimenting with the melting temperature, the pouring temperature, adjusting the temperature of the room when you're pouring and curing your candles, and where possible, take into consideration any humidity levels as well. So one thing to note is your supplier should supply you with the recommended temperatures and guidelines for the wax that you're using. But if you don't receive it from your supplier, what you can do is email them or give them a call and get their direct advice. One tip I do have is that even though the candle Facebook groups are full of people that are so supportive and so giving with their knowledge and their information, because we all make candles in different ways, the best way to find out how to make the candles that you're making with the materials that you have is to speak to the supplier directly. The next thing I want to chat to you about is knowing your wicks. So different wicks react differently to different waxes, and there are a lot of different wick brands out there. The wick can affect the life of your candle, the flame, the safety of the candle, and can give you different burns, so you need to match the wick to the type of candle that you're making. Some things to consider when you're choosing a wick is the type of wax, the candle size, meaning the diameter of the vessel or the pillar size, the fragrance oil you're using, and the color of the candle if you're using dyes. You can find charts or cheat sheets of wick options available online, but really this information should come from the supplier when you purchase your wicks, so get in touch with them when you buy your supplies. Knowing your fragrances is really important too. And like understanding the dynamics between your wick and wax, another component to factor in is the fragrance oils. Now, I don't know about you, but I love a scented candle, and we all want our candles to be long lasting, but there are several ways to add scent to your candles. Aside from understanding fragrance notes and how you can create your own unique blend of scents, you also have to know how each type of oil will affect your finished candle. For example, some oils do not do well when added while the melted wax is too hot, and some may not mix well with wax that is too cool. It's really important to make notes as you go. Candle making is a form of art, but it's also science as well. And to get the same result each time, you need to do the same thing each time, but more importantly, you need to know what actually works. So keep a log of notes from each batch you pour and as you test burn. And a few important things to note with every pour is the date and time, the wax type, the fragrance type, wick size and how many wicks you're using, the vessel or glass or jar size, the room temperature, the highest melting temperature of the wax, the temperature you added the fragrance, the temperature you poured the actual candles, and the percentage of fragrance oil that you used. The easiest way to do this is to create your own template for every test candle, or if you're wanting to find an already created template, Google candle test template and download a free online template. Print off a few sheets and have them handy whenever you make your candles and when you test them. Also, a big tip is to try and make the notes or actually write the test notes as it happens or as it's occurring. Expecting yourself to remember is setting yourself up to fail, and testing the same candle over and over is going to cost you time and money overall. Another important thing to note is that cold throw and hot throw can vary greatly for each fragrance oil. Cold throw is the fragrance from your candle when it's not lit. Hot throw is the scent when the wick is lit and the candle is emitting fragrance. These can provide quite a different experience for your nose, so expect that the smell out of the bottle can be a bit different to the result of your finished candle. This is another reason why candle testing is so important. Base, middle, and top notes will all shine through at different times and in different intensities. It's important to remember that your candles will likely be smelled first by customers via the cold throw, then taken home where they'll experience the hot throw after they light the candle. The hot throw is usually the most complex scent, and that's when the full depth of the fragrance is experienced. Don't be afraid to try fragrances that you're not sure about out of the bottle, as the fragrance will change from cold throw to hot throw regardless. Another thing to note is less can be more with fragrance. It seems pretty logical. The more fragrance you use, the better the fragrance throw, right? But the combination of wax and fragrance is complicated, and there are a lot of variables at play, and this is just another reason why testing is vital. Some fragrance oils are simply stronger and don't need much to give you a great scent throw. Others will require more fragrance oil but just won't perform with the same intensity as others. Experimenting with fragrance oil percentages, pour temperatures, cure time, etc. will all affect the hot throw of your candle, and it's a much better investment of your time, money and energy to spend it on these tests than adding in more fragrance oil. When you start your candle business, there are so many things to consider and research along the way, especially when it comes to choosing the right suppliers. Long Story Short provides all your design and printing needs, from your logo and branding to designing and printing your product labels. The quality is exceptional, the customer service is amazing, and prices are very reasonable. They're the only label company I recommend, so check out their website or send them an email today to get started. hello@longstoryshortdesign.com.au. One thing I want to add is that there's no one way to make a great candle. And what I mean by that is that there's multiple ways to make a great candle. Unfortunately, there's no secret recipe or secret sauce to creating candles that work and work well. Asking around for advice can be helpful, and so can reading up on the topic or watching videos on YouTube. But after enough testing and experimenting, you will find a method which may be completely your own. All right, so now we've come to the fun part of this episode where I'm going to talk through my entire candle making process. And I thought this might be just a nice little bonus for this episode if you've ever been curious about the exact steps I take to make my candles. So the first thing I do is, of course, gather all my supplies and materials. So that includes like the actual jars that I'm using, their corresponding lids, the wicks, the stickums, the labels, the warning labels, those sorts of things. And also the equipment that I use as well. So I'm talking about the pouring pitchers. I have two, the pipettes or pipettes, I think they're called. They're like little, what do you call them? Little piping... I don't know how else to describe them, but they're called pipettes. Look it up, Pipettes, just Google it. But I also use alcohol spray, cloths, obviously the wax melter as well as the fragrance oil and the wax itself. So the first thing I do after I've got all my supplies and materials is I turn on my wax melter. Now the one I use is the LCS 27 litre, and I add enough wax to fill it about 3/4 of the way. So I don't fill it to the top, but it's definitely more than half. And then I'll set the dial to the correct temperature for my wax and let the wax start melting whilst I prep my jars. So to do that, with the jars, how I actually prep them is that I'll clean them first with using alcohol spray and a cloth. Once they've all been cleaned, and depending on how big of a batch I'm making will depend on how long that takes, I'll then add the warning labels to the base of all the jars, and then I'll add my fragrance or brand labels on the side of the jar. What I like to do, and this is just a little bit of the OCD in me, is I'll lie the candle jar on its side and turn it so that the warning label is the right way up, and then I'll put the my brand label or fragrance label on the top. So if a person is looking at the jar and they are holding it in their hand and are looking at the label and then just turn it slightly, they'll see the warning label the right way up. Just a small detail, but something I like to do so it's a little less friction for the customer to have to turn the jar further just to read what's on the warning label. The next step I'll take is add the stickums to the bottom of the wicks, and again, depending on how many candles I'm making will depend on how long this process takes. And then I'll add the wicks to the base of each jar. Now I like to use an empty pen casing to do that. So what I do is I will put the wick inside the empty pen casing and place the quick wick on the bottom of the jar, the base part of the quick wick, and then I'll use the empty pen casing and hold that and hold the top of the wick and press it down into the center of the jar. Really simple, really fast, and then just repeat that process. Then once all the wicks are securely attached to the base of the jar, then I will put the top part of the quick wick on the jar and secure the top part of the wick so that it's nice and tight and completely straight. Meanwhile, the wax is still melting in the background. The next thing I'll do is I'll measure out my fragrance oil and portion out for the amount of candles I'm making for each fragrance using the gram scales and a pipette along the edge of the top of the fragrance oil bottle to prevent any fragrance oil leaking down the side of the bottle. Now this is, it's hard to explain, easier to show, so unfortunately this is not a visual example, but if you're holding the fragrance oil bottle, at a 45-degree angle and use the pipette just on the top where the liquid actually comes out, then you angle or you point the pipette inside the pouring or the fragrance oil pot, and then as you tip the fragrance oil bottle, the liquid will go down the pipette rather than down the side of the bottle or all over the bench. I really hope that makes sense. Just send me a DM on Instagram if you need me to send you like a visual video of what I mean. But basically it means you don't need any other equipment or supplies to make sure you're not wasting any fragrance oil. So now that the wax is melted, I decant the right amount of wax needed for the batch that I'm making by weighing the pouring pitcher first and tearing the scales to 0 grams. Then I turn the spout on the wax melter and use my heat gun if needed to melt the wax in the spout. Of course, the heat gun is on low. And then it's just a matter of filling the jug up to the right amount and checking the weight in the jug, like the weight of the wax in the jug, by placing it back on the scale and then just measuring it and adding more or taking out wax if I need to, if it's not the right amount. Another great tip is just be careful of your scales. Sometimes if they're not used for 20-30 seconds, they'll turn off. And if you've teared your scale to 0 and then it turns off and then you're putting the pouring pitcher back on the scales, it means it won't be an accurate reading. So just be mindful of that. Then once I've got the right amount of wax, I check the temperature with my laser thermometer. If it's the right temperature to add fragrance, I will do that straight away. Otherwise, I'll just wait until the wax cools down to the right temperature before I add my fragrance oil in. And then depending on how much wax and fragrance oil or how many candles I'm making, I'll stir the two together for 1 to 2 minutes. And then I'll check the temperature, ensure it's ready for pouring, and then I pour the wax and fragrance oil into my pre-prepared jars one by one. Then I let the candles cure until set in the same spot as I pour. I try not to move them for at least overnight because I don't want to disturb the candle setting process. In the morning, I'll give them a heat gun over the top if they need, but of course I'm removing the quick wick first. And then after 24 hours, I trim the wicks, pop the lids on, and let them cure completely for at least a week before I sell them. That's my entire process from start to finish. Pretty detailed, pretty OCD in some points, but that's just how I am. So that's my process. So I just want to end this episode on more of a thoughtful note. Candle making is a craft that takes time to get right, and it is a journey along the way to making your version of the perfect candle that makes the end result worth the time and energy invested. It does take time, effort, and the right tools and materials to create your ideal candle. You can't rush it, and you rarely get it perfectly on the first try. It can be difficult and different for everyone, depending on how specific you are with your desired output, and that's okay. There's no one way to do it, as I said earlier. Every candle maker has her or his style of preference, depending on how you want the candle and the burn to turn out. So I would love to know, do you have any other candle tips and tricks for beginner candle makers? If you're experienced and you're listening to this episode, I would love to hear your thoughts. So send me a DM on Instagram at Candle Business Coach, and I might just do a part 2 for this episode topic. Last thing I want to leave you with is to not compare yourself with anyone else, because this is your journey. Thanks everyone for listening today. I hope this episode added value to your candle making journey. Check out the show notes for all the links mentioned throughout today's show, and please subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks again for listening. Have a beautiful day.